Hear me? That's better. I'd like to welcome everybody to the meeting tonight of the Future Council Scrutiny Committee. It's focused tonight on the Black Country Plan and the outcomes from the consultation period. So we'll move on. The one thing that I have to point out is that we are streaming the meeting tonight. And I'd like to inform you all that the broadcast will be live on the internet and recorded for future viewing on the council website. Normally what we do when members of the public want to ask questions, we don't actually view you from privacy point of view. So firstly, I'd like to ask if there are any apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair. Apologies received from Councillors Dobb and Councillor Caulfield.
Thank you. To report any appointment of any substitute members for anybody absent tonight.
Yes, Chair. Substitute members, Councillor Collins and Councillor Stanley for Councillors Dobb and Caulfield.
I'd like to confirm the accuracy of the minutes from the last meeting. Is everybody in agreement that it's an accurate record?
Yeah, no issues regarding accuracy, but at the previous meeting we did say consideration would be given to inclusion of a standing item in relation to outstanding actions and matters discussed. So there was a request to have a standing agenda item of matters arising. And there are some matters arising, actually.
Well, yeah, I understood that, but from the last meeting. But the agenda is constitutionalised, and you know we're not going to change the agenda for that particular point. It's down to the members to really remember what questions they asked, and if there are any issues, you can raise them now. If you haven't received...
In effect, that is a matters arising then.
Sorry?
Yeah, that is a matters arising then in effect.
We're not putting a matters arising point on the agenda for this scrutiny committee. What we're asking you to do is to confirm that it's an accurate record.
Yeah.
And if you do have any points that you want to bring out, now's the time to do it.
That's fantastic. That's what I was going to suggest. So even though we haven't got an agenda item which says matter arising, we can actually raise matters arising. So that's helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I just come in? Yeah, just to confirm that there was a discussion with Democratic Services, and it has agreed that in the next municipal year going forward there will be an agenda item on agendas discussing any outstanding actions and matters discussed at previous meetings. So that's going to be put on all scrutiny. Going forward from the municipal year, yeah, for all scrutiny committees.
Raise any matters arising need to. Another point that I wanted to make as well is this is a special meeting, isn't it, of the Future Council Scrutiny Committee to meet to consider only one issue, and that is the Black Country Plan. That's my understanding.
The meeting was set up to consider the outcomes from the consultation period, which will be done and is documented in this yellow book. And also, towards the end, the officers will discuss lessons learnt, because the process of the Black Country Plan and the scrutiny of it has gone through a cycle where it's iteratively been able to improve what actions were taken over the period. And
this is a... Yeah.
Purely the outcomes from the consultation period, not the Black Country Plan or the process of the Black Country Plan going forward. And there will be a section on lessons learned from this year. You will have the opportunity next year, I'm sure, to add those points you may want to make going forward.
Is that because this is a special meeting to consider only the issues relating to the Black Country Plan, we have actually got within the papers the minutes of the last ordinary meeting rather than the previous meetings of the Black Country Plan special scrutiny committee meetings, which is what really should be included with these papers, because there are still some matters arising of relevance from previous meetings regarding the Black Country Plan, which should be carried over to this meeting.
Sorry?
So just raise them in the in the main agenda item, and if it's to do with the Black Country Plan, which is when we're going to be discussing it.
The last meeting of relating to the Black Country Plan was the 24th of November, where there was a large item on the Black Country Plan with some recommendations for action.
All previous minutes have actually been approved on the Black Country Plan. The agenda and the focus for this meeting is on the outcomes from the consultation period. Yep, that's what we're here to do. We're not here to discuss issues in the past. And as chair, I'm not going to allow it, so can we move on?
Thank you for the opportunity. I don't think we're disagreeing. I think it's the important thing is to appreciate what we have agreed in the past and where we are and how we go forward. What we agreed was that there will be a special meeting about the Black Country Plan and the progress we have made, and indeed we are discussing that, as has been pointed out. And not only that, you have graciously said that we will raise issues and try to learn from this process. None of that is doubted or questioned. What is being said and being requested is, because it was agreed that this will be a special meeting of the Scrutiny Committee to consider particularly the item on the agenda, which we all agree, and therefore it is important that we have the full papers, and the full papers in this case could include the whole bundle so far, or more appropriately and more specifically, the minutes of the last meeting, as has been requested by Councillor Foster. And I think that's not an unfair demand. Otherwise, we cannot really talk about the progress made and lessons learned unless we have that specific document here, basically the minutes of the last meeting. Thank you.
Minutes. I'm with you. Go on the internet and get them. I don't see what we're talking about here. It seems daft. We're discussing what we're going to be discussing later. Let's just get to the item that we're here to talk about. Whether we've got minutes or not, when they're public and everybody.
Which we would like to ask some questions about, but we think it would benefit other members to have those papers as well.
I'm repeating myself here, really. There will be opportunity towards the end when the officers talk about lessons learned, where if you have a point to make where maybe you think something could be done better, that will be the time to ask it. We are not going over previous agendas where the minutes have already been signed off and agreed by you as well. We are here to consider the outcomes of the consultation period. This is almost episode 4 of the Black Country Plan, prior to the end of the council year, and we need to stick to the agenda. The agenda is here. Use the time towards the end to make those questions. If we're not going to distribute all the previous agendas and minutes, if people want to ask questions, they will have brought those questions with them. They would have prepared for this meeting. Do you understand that?
I do, Chair, but I'm not sure. Scrutiny process, and I think I would welcome, I think one of the learning points will be scrutiny training for members, including chairs. I think that would be very helpful for all of us. Thank you.
I'm going to assume that the Minutes have been accepted by the members. And now we're going to move to the public section. Now, I think we have 3 members of the public. Can you just put your hands up if you want to ask questions? There's 2.
And then Steve.
Yeah, okay.
Tim first.
Yeah. Okay. We allow 30 minutes for this section. Yep. Each member of the public has 5 minutes. And
It's not a question as such. What I'd like to ask if you can actually turn the volume up because we can't actually hear you very well at all. Is that possible?
I'll shout a bit louder, shall I? Okay, right. Yeah, come down here. Yeah, good idea.
Ask Mr. Weller to.
Hey?
Do you want to ask Mr. Weller to do his?
Yeah, oh yeah. We'll wait for them to get down, shall we? We'll wait for them to get down. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Carl's the one who's going to do the main bit, isn't he?
Yeah.
While we're waiting, can I just point out for members, if you want to ask a question, can you raise your hand as well, so that Emma can see, because she's controlling the microphones tonight. Right, if we're all sitting comfortably, I'm going to ask Mr. Tim Weller to ask his question first off. So over to you, Tim.
Having lost my nearly 30-year-old request that when you have a principal mainline railway, you should put commuter and regional trains back on it between Stourbridge and Burton-on-Trent, instead of trams, I would like to ask for your support over this one tiny concession, please, that I think should have unanimous support. Now, at Maryhill Shopping Centre, the tram track for about 200 metres runs alongside the canal. And halfway along that section, between Level Street roundabout and where it swings into Brierley Hill tram stop, you've got the Merry Hill tram stop. So it runs parallel to the canal. But the problem is it runs across the grassy embankment where there are at least half a dozen trees on that grassy embankment. And I'm simply asking for all of you to give your support for what I think is a perfectly sensible suggestion, that the track be moved just 2 or 3 meters to the west. So instead of running alongside the towpath on this great grassy open space, you get the engineers at Midland Metro Alliance to please put the thing on stilts above the canal waterway instead of on stilts above the grassy embankment. This then means that the high plateau, which is down for housing, has all of that land available for housing, instead of the northern corner of it being taken by the metro tram track. So if you ask for the tram to go on stilts above the canal, you'll save that area of land, you'll get more housing there, and you'll also allow that grass embankment to remain as a very important open space. It means that nature will not get hammered, and you'll be able to understand more of what I've just been saying if you could read my email that I've sent to every single one of you earlier today that is on this committee. So please, if you could instruct your chair to just write to Midland Metro Alliance and the Transport for West Midlands, and even if Councillor Patrick could please write as leader, so that we get a sensible movement, just this small concession, so the track goes on the canal on stilts instead of on the grassy embankment on stilts. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tim. Do any members have any comments on what Tim has just said? Councillor Rogers.
Thank you. Yes, I see the what Tim's mentioned, and you did send an email earlier talking about the canal as it comes in the back of Link 51 behind the cinema. I can see exactly what you're saying, and the canal boats are only 4 foot above the water, so I don't see why we can't have the stilts literally 6 foot across from the embankment. It does make sense, but we can ask, but I don't think we can promise. And I think you're about 18 months a bit too late, because I think all the plans have been submitted now and they've been passed, and you know, construction work has started, so I think you're a bit late for that, but we can ask.
Councillor Ali.
Support what Councillor Rogers has said. You know, certainly from this committee we can write to Metro and ask them to consider the request, if possible, within the timescales of where things are.
Any other members want to make a point? No? Okay, well, Tim, we will note that point. We will also note what the members have said. And we can certainly put that forward to our regeneration team and see if we can get a response. Okay. You happy with that? Thank you very much. Okay. Over to the gentleman there. Oh, okay. Yes. So any of the other members of the public want to ask a question? No? Okay. We'll move on then. We're moving on to the Black Country Draft Plan Consultation Update, pages 1 to 15. And I'm now going to ask Officer Miller to respond to that agenda point.
Thank you, Chair. As indicated, we're looking to feedback on the Black Country Plan consultation that took place over an 8-week period last summer, or more specifically from August to early October last year. This is obviously a Black Country Plan consultation that was carried out collectively across the 4 authorities and agreed by all 4 cabinets. The report that's in your yellow book and that I'm about to go through, I think I just want to bring attention to paragraph 5 to make it clear that some of these numbers might be slightly different from when we wrote the reports. We are still working through duplications and some of the numbers that might have been processed last minute, but they're pretty much spot on when you consider the overall number. But there might be the odd deviation, and where I'm aware of them already, I'll raise them in the reports. So just in summary, we had in the region of 19,500 respondents on the plan. These are broken down in paragraph 6 in terms of how they came in. 4,500 came in individually in written form or emails or letters. 1,500 on the websites. We also had responses from statutory consultees and landowners, and then we had the vast majority were in group responses of just over 13,500. You'll recall that we allowed people to respond in a group fashion rather than write individual comments where they're in agreement, and that accounts for the 13,500. We also had petitions, 10 petitions in total, which are recorded, and I'll come on to those in a moment. Just to give you context of what that is in terms of response, that's a huge response. In the Black Country core strategy that's currently adopted, that was adopted in 2011, we had 165 responses to that consultation exercise. And on the issues and options for this particular plan, a few years ago now, we had just shy of 2,000 responses. Again, for comparison, paragraph 8 talks about other authorities are going through a similar process to ourselves. As you see there, South Worcestershire's joint plan had 7,000 respondents, and the other plans had significantly less. Cannock Chase only 99, Shropshire 2,500. So our 19,500 dwarfs those. Now, obviously, I appreciate that we've got different population figures and different sizes, but still, 19,500 is clearly a very healthy response. The initial analysis, which is more Dudley specific, that was the Black Country, we had 7,500 representations, individual representations within Dudley or sites that relate to Dudley. We also had, of the 10 group responses, 7 of them were for Dudley or Dudley sites. And of the petitions, again, 7 petitions were for Dudley sites. We have summarised in numbers from paragraph 10 the numbers for those group responses. The biggest one by far is the joint response relating to the south of Holbeach Lane and the land at Swindon Road, which we refer to as the Triangle, where there's 8,000 objectors on that group response. We also had significant numbers elsewhere. We've got Severn Drive, Bryce Road, Lapwood Avenue, Ketley Quarry, and those numbers equaled 418, 104 and 789 in total on those different submissions. So we've broken them down where they came from different sources. I shouldn't make a note of this, the Friends of Homer Hill Park and Cradley, which are objecting to that not being included as a local green space, we put 255 there. We now know that's 366, and we confirmed that with the submitter. And that's one example of where the numbers are slightly off at the moment. But this report was written a number of weeks ago, as you can appreciate. We have 4,500 from Sainsbury's Average Greenbelt, and we also had a number of smaller sites, but in comparison, 80 for the Wollaston Greenbelt and Farming Land. We've had to split them up because unless the group response was exactly the same and from the same source, we've had to treat them as separate responses. But again, the 19,500 responses, we had petitions in Dudley with over 7,000 signatures on as well. In the report, we also had support for the Corbett Meadow local green space, which I think is worth mentioning, highlighting. We had objections on most of our sites, I'd say pretty much all of our greenbelt sites, a number of our green field sites. They're summarised in paragraph 12, much the same as we just went through. But it's also important to make you aware that some of our objections came from landowners and developers. So we received a number of objections to sites we didn't include in the plan, and they're very technical objections. We have to go through those. And we had, as you can imagine, supporting comments from landowners and developers whose sites are or were included in the draft plan. Again, just to bolster their position in terms of the appropriateness for developments. Excuse me, on paragraph 15, I've just referred to, again, the Corbett Green Space designation, the support we had for that. and also a supporting comment from Hales Owen area about the fact that no sites were allocated within the green belt in that area. Some objections to the lack of further green space designations, which I can come on to if you're interested in that at some point. But in paragraph 17, we've summarised the main points that came across in those responses. As you can imagine, loss of green space in principle, impact on traffic, the impact on local nature conservation, site specifically, so that's about 2/3 of the total, which I think is an outstanding response from the people of Dudley. And what we're doing now, and we have been doing for a while, is working through those responses, not only the technical admin of getting them on the system, because we've got a number of written responses we've had to put into the system, but also analysing what people have said, and we will combine that with further evidence to come to some recommendations for Cabinet on the publication plan. At the moment as well, just to make it clear, we had hoped to publish the reps in full around about now. We're now confident that we'll be publishing them online the week commencing the 14th of March, so 2 weeks from now. And that will be all of the reps verbatim published on the website for people to look at and be confident they've been included. So just moving on then, the next stage is outlined in paragraphs 23 and 24. 23 specifically about the consultation stage. So we're publishing the responses I just mentioned. We're still waiting, but it's nearly complete transport modelling, which is key to our considerations going forward. And then we'll look to prepare the publication plan before it goes to cabinets, the 4 cabinets in the summer. That intention then is to have a further publication consultation exercise in August to early October this year. The overall plan timetable remains unchanged. We are on track for adoption hopefully in April 2024, but the individual stages are set out in paragraph 24 to show you how we'll get to that, to achieve that. I think the final thing I just want to land on, we've got a summary of some of the thematic responses in your appendix, which are a bit more detailed about the kind of things that were brought up and the themes that were mentioned. But I think it's important to stress how large the consultation response was across the Black Country and specifically Dudley, and that's going to be very helpful for us in terms of making our recommendations going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to just make, so it's clear for everybody, a next step sort of summary? And then we can ask questions, yeah?
Thank you, Chair. So, it was mentioned, lessons learned were mentioned earlier on. What we've been doing is we've made some adaptations throughout the last process. When we had issues around the website, we had issues around the form only allowing 1 entry per site, and at that time we allowed the group submissions, as I mentioned, but also for people to list more than 1 site if the issues were the same on their forms. We also responded to meetings last time around in a reactive way, because when we put our comms programme together, we had a serious issue with COVID and we couldn't commit to having public meetings. Luckily, when the time arose, public meetings were viable, and we attended all the meetings we were asked to attend, you'll probably recall. This time round, and I'll move on to what we intend to do for our learning on this, is we'd look to arrange those meetings ourselves as a council, to invite the interested parties and to run those meetings and make sure that everyone gets their say. We're also looking to make the process as easy as possible for consultations. So what we want to do in the next steps is we will be emailing and writing to everyone who made a formal submission on the last stage of the plan. The only caveat would be sometimes it's been very difficult to identify some individuals because of handwriting and addresses. We can only do what we can do, but we've got 13,000. Excuse me.
Mails, letters, and about 9,500 emails.
So we're looking to write to 11,000 people who wrote in, and we'll email the 9,000 other people that we can. That will also make them aware of the next stage of the consultation. They'll be on our database, and we'll also write to them at that appropriate stage. We also will pursue the multi-channel approach in terms of communication. So colleagues in comms might want to come in, but we use our traditional channels. We're going to utilise the home magazine, posters, media relations we have, and social media outlets, plus the website and targeted e-bulletins. And the next phase of conversation is technically complex, the next stage. It's not necessarily an open house in terms of comment submission. What we will be doing at that stage is asking whether the plan is sound or whether the process we've gone through is a sound process to come to our conclusions. What we would be on hand to do, as we were last time, but we'll have officers available throughout the entire period to help people through the submission process. We will have drop-in sessions, and in those drop-in sessions we'll bring the IT with us so that people can use the IT with officers if they want to make submissions, if that's the issue, to make it more speedy. And we'll also provide guidance notes to members and members of the public as how to make their responses. I'll repeat it myself on the final point, but I think it was very important that this time round we do organise those meetings proactively, and we'll liaise with members to where those meetings need to be. When the appropriate time for those meetings is, we'll arrange the venues and we'll lead those meetings and make sure that everyone has their say. I think that's what we propose to the next steps of the consultation. Thank you, Chair.
No, I think that's very comprehensive, Carl. I think it does show that we have improved the process during the process, and we've had a very, very successful consultation period from what I see of the figures here. Very good. Okay, I'm going to open up to members now. So, members, if you'd like to make any comments.
All right, thank you. I think, first of all, in terms of the response rate, and certainly Dudley certainly has formed the lion's share of the numbers of the responses against the Black Country. I think it's worth paying tribute to the community for the level of response, particularly to groups like Wallheath as one, where actually the numbers have been boosted by people's concerns about the proposals and how you've managed to organise, which has certainly boosted the numbers. People's concern and outrage, in some cases, about what was proposed and what was put out there, has certainly stimulated people's interest to respond. So I think it's really important to make that point. The council did, towards the end of the process, end up with a process of its own by consulting, and these drop-in days. I know that they arranged those, but there were hundreds rather than thousands who participated in those. But in terms of community organisation, thousands of people responded, and I'd like to pay tribute to them for caring about their green belt and green spaces and making themselves heard, in a way that, that as elected members, they need to be heard.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to begin by thanking the officers for the support. During the consultation period, it's no secret that there were some problems, but every issue raised by myself, my ward colleagues, were all dealt with, and on behalf of our residents, we really appreciate that support that was given. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our residents, led by the amazing Wallheath One and friends of Ridgeo Woods, along with my ward colleague, Councillor Ed Lawrence and Councillor Phil Atkins. We worked very closely with our residents, organising and attending consultation sessions, delivering leaflets, knocking doors to make people aware. And as a result, our ward of Kingsmanford North and Wallheath had the highest number of objections recorded for the two sites in our ward. The petition done by the group triggered a debate, which I think was a first in a very long time. And I also welcome the leader's comments made last week, who said, and I quote, "The views of thousands of people cannot be ignored, and the plans to build on the green belt in Dudley Borough should be thrown out." And I second this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Like other previous speakers, I think we have to accept it was a tremendous challenge, this consultation, and we also have to say thank you to all those who participated. And I like to say that officers were learning as we were going along. There was a lot to learn, and they've acknowledged that. So one response to this report is it's good that things have been learned, but more importantly, what this report shows is that between 2011, where 165 people participated, and this consultation, where nearly 13,500 Dudley boroughs population have contributed. There has been a tremendous communication revolution, and the revolution can only benefit people if we adopt the technologies and the means of reaching people. But nevertheless, the credit still lies with the communities and those people who realized how important this consultation was, not only for themselves, but for the futures to come. So I think we have to acknowledge that. One point, as you know, I have made consistently, and I don't think this is the time that I could let it go. It was the small places. My worry still remains that the small places that have been identified in the plan, they did not involve and manage to get sufficient engagement. And I hope just because there wasn't sufficient engagement from the smaller spaces, smaller grain spaces, I hope they are not forgotten when the full response is prepared. So I like to say thank you for learning as we were going, and more importantly, there are outstanding issues which we will discuss at some other time, but it's helpful to know that people have learned. Thank you.
Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've just got a few questions on the report. When we handed in the petition, or when Wallheathers 1 handed in the petition, and Friends of Ridge Hill, there was sort of 10,000 signatures on there, whereas in the report it says 8,000. I'm assuming that's due to duplication. Will we get any figures on what was handed in, what's been taken out, and the reasons why they've been taken out?
Yep. Yeah, the response that you submitted, or Wallheathers 1, which I collected, we broke it down because some of them were comments forms. So we've processed all those comments forms individually, and then the group response was about 8,000 signatures, or names and addresses attached to that, and that's what we've processed as a group response. So we have got all the 10,000 that was submitted for Wallheathers 1, we've just processed it in different ways. So one was a group response, but then there was big piles of comments forms which we've processed as well. And
there would have been some duplication in there, and so there would be some figures to show what numbers have been taken out.
I don't recall a huge amount for that one submission, but it's just because it was submitted in different ways, and like a lot of the reps that came forward, they were submitted in different ways, and we've got to break them down and process them separately and differently.
So the 10,000 ultimately is still there, it's just been split up a little bit different, that's fine.
It's led to 20,000 representations, because each response, if you comment on two aspects of the plan, those become 2 reps, and it's led to 20,000 representations. It's basically going to, it's taken quite some time to download and that report. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Foster.
Process. I think there's some learning from that as well, as part of the whole consultation process. Sorry, I do apologise. You bring me in.
No, I've got lots of questions, sorry. The traffic analysis, we're still waiting on that. I just wondered when we might expect to hear. It seems to be going on a long time. I know it's not our officers that are doing that, but just an update as to where we are with it and when it hopefully will be coming.
The first phase was done a while ago, but that phase is really modelling all the things that exist already and all the transport interventions that exist already. So that's not very valuable for us to move it forward in here, but that was done a number of weeks ago. It was always anticipated to be late February, early March, so I've got a meeting tomorrow with my other Black Country leads. We'll be asking the question on when we expect to receive that data. We have been pushing the issue, but as you said, we're not in control of it, unfortunately. We need that information really soon to give us the opportunity to fully analyse it and to test it against different scenarios. So we'll be asking that question tomorrow, and as soon as I'm in a position to update members on having that information, I will.
Okay, so that's coming soon then, basically. Yeah, okay. at the last scrutiny meeting, the one I chaired, we did ask for some work around population figures. And I know we've sort of given that a response in regards to the council not being able to do it. And I know Karen's come tonight. So I just wondered if it's worth Karen just giving a brief, not an in-depth, but a brief outline of why that wasn't possible yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And can I just commend as well, I think the community involvement and the response have been absolutely fantastic. It really is. Yeah, what we were asked to do is to actually look at the methodology in terms of are there accurate population predictions. And the outcome of that piece of work, which is really from the intelligence team and talking to my colleagues here, is the national formula is a robust approach that is used. It's right to use the 2014 figures. And in one of the areas where there was challenge, that was actually because you did see quite an increase in the predictions, and that was Coventry. And the reason that was there was really because the student population and people moving in and out of the area. So I'm satisfied that the national approach, which is through the ONS, is accurate. The data is accurate, and there's nothing that we need to be challenging on that because, again, we haven't got a particular huge increase, and there's no reason to question that that is a valid data set. I don't know if colleagues want to come in on that any further. Thank you.
Yeah.
On Karen's comments, we've looked into it. The ONS data was also reviewed by the Office of Statistical Regulation because of the concerns, particularly around Coventry, with the large increase in household projections, which was based on international migration of international students. But that review by OSR found that the figures were fit for purpose. They did recommend that they do more detailed work around small towns and cities with a large student population. Also, I think just to pick up a flag up, obviously we are expecting the 2021 census data to be released in May, and what we will be doing, because obviously as you move further away over the 10-year period, further away from previous census period, the reliability of data starts to reduce. So we are commissioning some work to be done in May when those figures come out before we finalise the next stage of the plan to look at the 2021 census data and to run that alongside the housing figures that we've got. So we will be doing that analysis as we move towards the publication plan.
Thank you. Excuse me, did I hear you say that you had 2014 figures?
The government requires us to use 2014 data, so that's what we're required to use under the current standard method. Until they tell us otherwise, we have to use those figures.
How can we be expected to work to figures that are 7 years out of date or 8 years out of date? It's absurd.
That's the requirement for the house standard method that we use, which government guidance is that we use a 2014 household forecast. If you look at household forecasts, later ones, the 2018 being the most recent one, our household growth is actually higher for Dudley, so our housing numbers would be higher. But that is the figures that we are required to use by the standard method, which is set by government. As I've just explained, when the 2021 census information is made available in May, we will be able to check that data.
The figure I saw, I think, was 324,000. That was the figure most recent figure I've seen for our population.
The actual increase in population growth, and then you work it into household numbers.
In many ways, population hasn't gone where they thought there was. In fact, it's a different country in many ways to where we were 8 years ago. Surely these figures should be looked at seriously, and I don't doubt they'll find a need, and there will be a need within our area. I'm not arguing about that at all, but I do think that this country over the last 7 or 8 years has changed radically in more than one sense.
The household projections are based on estimated high international migration estimates, particularly where you've got high international migrations of student population. But if you look at Dudley's population growth figures in more detail, our growth is really generated around natural change, which is birth rates over death rates, and also internal migration, not people from outside, but actually movement within the country. We do have a lot of people moving from some surrounding local authorities into Dudley. So, and the more houses we actually developed quite a lot of houses, so you get new households probably moving in from neighbouring local authorities.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll just come in at this point. All 7 Met leaders have those very same concerns, that we think that some of the data we're being asked to work with, and we are forced to work with what we've got. All 7 Met leaders across the West Midlands and indeed the Black Country leaders, we all share those concerns. We've had 3 conversations now with the former Minister responsible, Chris Pincher, who unfortunately now has been moved sideways. We're still awaiting details of a possible meeting with his successor, but we're still at loggerheads with the relevant ministry to argue that these figures just don't fit what we're being asked to supply. So it's something that we agree with, but we yet to get an actual official response. The minister did sympathise, and as far as the former minister, I think he was more intent on getting the Black Country Plan approved and sent to Bristol for examination on time, rather than worrying too much about whether we actually meet those housing numbers. But of course, that's his predecessor's point of view. We now need to find out what the new minister thinks. Thank you.
I'm from Councillor Harley. Michael Gove took over as Secretary of State some months ago as well. There is supposed to be a review of how we do the housing numbers. That was suggested in the planning white paper that came out about 18 months ago. But due to the change of Secretary of State, that is being reviewed again. But we are expecting that decision to come out in the next few months as well. And depending on where we are in the plan preparation, we will need to take any changes on board.
The next phase of the Black Country Plan goes forward.
We'll need to review the figures for when we get before we do the publication plan. Yeah.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think my point of my question was just to verify why Dudley Council couldn't do it in silo, and obviously it's a massive task that needs looking at nationally, which Councillor Harley has alluded to there. I've just got one more question, and it's kind of, I didn't realise Patrick was going to be here, but I'll ask him as well. So it's as a planner and as the leader of the council, Carl and Patrick, have you ever seen a response of this size before, in your professional career, Carl, and yourself, Patrick? Because it is a huge response to, especially within my ward in Kings Winford. And are you prepared to say, in the light of these thousands of responses, that building on the green belt is still the right idea?
I'll start. Yeah, I mean, I've not seen a response this big, and the research we've done that we put into this paper suggests that we haven't. That's a very high number, regardless of our overall population. To have this much engagement on a technical document like a plan, which can be very dry. Let's be honest, planning documents can be very dry, is really phenomenal. So I think that's worth taking on board. I'm aware, and I won't speak for Councillor Harley, but obviously it's imperative we do take on board all the comments we've got. We give them the weight that they deserve, along with other evidence that we've got. As officers, we have to make recommendations based on what we think we need to do to reach the targets we've been set. That's what we always have done and always will do. It won't be our decision ultimately. It'll be members who decide what goes into the publication stage of the plan. What we will do is advise based on the technical information we've got, the comments we've had from residents, and we'll allow members to scrutinise those questions. We have got a very high need figure. Without going over the population stats again, what we've put in the draft plan to date is what we think we need to do, the best we can do. The need is still 20,000+, we're still 20,000+ short. Obviously, the need figure might change based on changes in government policy. That will then obviously mean that we have to adapt and course. So I think it was still the right thing to put Greenbelt sites in for consideration. But obviously, we will take on board what people have said about those sites, the evidence we've got, and comments from all stakeholders. Thanks.
Harley, do you have some?
Cheers, Chair. Was it right to put them in at the beginning? Yes, it was. Because by putting them in, we've seen the tremendous response that we've had from the general public, who have put pen to paper, got petitions, gone out knocking doors in all weathers, held public meetings, and we've had a really, really strong response from that community. Would we have had that same strong response prior to COVID? Possibly not. Maybe because of COVID, the fact that people have realised what they've got around them when we're not busy driving to work because we've had to work from home, maybe we've realised what we've got around us and we value it a little bit more than what we did 2 or 3 years ago. So that could have had a change on the numbers too. But it was right to put in what the planners did at the time so that we can go through the proper process. Had we thrown out every site at the very beginning of this process and just literally stuck 2 fingers up to the government and said, look, we're not building these houses, that's it. Because politically we're feeding the heat, or residents are moaning, or they're onto our backs because they don't like it. We'll throw them all out and we'll just put brownfield forward. We would have got slaughtered by the inspectorate. And I'm still not preempting anything at this stage, but you look at that response, 2/3 coming from this borough across the whole of the Black Country. As leader of this council, if you want a consultation process that's worth a damn, you have to take note of that sort of response. And if you don't, forget about the consequences. But if you don't, then why the hell do we have it in the first place? And that's where I come from. If you're going to do it and you have a response like that, you have to surely take note. And that, along with the other mitigating factors that will come later in the day, such as the traffic impact assessment, which any fool can see that it will be quite negative towards particularly 2 large developments where these guys are interested. What we need to know is how negative it will impact, but any idiot could see that it will. The roads around Kingswick and Warlith now can't cope as they are. To put nearly over another 1,000 homes there would be disastrous. So I think the process was right from the start. It needed improving. Across the Black Country was improved, hence the response we've got. But we have to sit up and take note of that. I think to do so, I think, is a slap in the face to all the residents who put pen to paper. And if you're not going to do that, Chair, then why consult in the first place?
Councillor Foster.
Chair, I wanted to, in terms of the learning the lessons, I think one of the lessons that have emerged from this is the need to improve scrutiny and improve the scrutiny process. Every administration, whether it's been Labour or Conservative, have always at the outset said, one thing that we need to do is looking at scrutiny. And I don't think we've got round to doing that yet properly. But I do think there are a lot of issues that have been highlighted throughout the course of the last few months, which demonstrate where the strengths of the process that we have, but more importantly, the weaknesses of the process that we currently have. I always look to what Parliament does. Parliamentary scrutiny is taken very seriously. It's well-resourced. You don't get an agenda or anything like this. It's much thicker than this. You get all the minutes of the notes of previous meetings, all Hansard, recorded Hansard style, with, reports from independent specialists, the whole range of resources available to those involved in the scrutiny process that we don't have, and we should have had for this particular process, given its significance. I think that not having a scrutiny process is insulting to the general public. If the Parliament think that their process is good enough for the public and the right thing for the public, we should be reflecting that as well and say that we should have a process that's fit for purpose, because this is the outcome at the end of the day is improving services for the benefit of the public. So I think that one of the next steps should be that we look at the scrutiny process in terms of the lessons that have been learned from this, that we look at the documentation that we have at hand and the information, that we look at the witnesses that we bring in. And certainly from my group's perspective, we did produce a long list of witnesses that we would have liked to have seen, and we have seen very few of them. And I think we need to give some thought to the sort of independent advice and expertise we can bring in to scrutiny exercises so that we're properly acting in the public interest. So I think that one action going forward would be to look at that process along with the consultation process that people have already discussed in some detail.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. It might be an idea if you want to make some sort of constitutional comments that maybe you put a note through to Democratic Services that could be considered. I think the scrutiny process has worked extremely well and the outcomes really support that. If you look at two areas, you talk about expert witnesses. I can't remember exactly which meeting it was, but I sent an email out, Democratic Services sent an email out to ask members to ask specific questions at a meeting where we had brought in a number of subject matter experts. And I can remember you not wanting to ask those questions. And you went whittering on about the paper, this paper you got and that paper you got. You let your side down and you let the public down by not asking those questions because they could have been very pertinent to the process. Secondly, I think the way the process mended itself, where we had the public were very dissatisfied with the way the communications programme was going out to the public. It wasn't getting through to people. The registration system that we got didn't work properly. And at that meeting, I basically explained to the officers and the cabinet member that they need to get their heads together and improve the process. And I think that's what happened. And the big difference was, during the Black Country meetings here, the members of public that have actually attended is probably not been more than 30 people. That is really disappointing. By going out, taking the alternative, which is what I said to the officers, go and use the 72 councillors as your conduit to get out to the public. And many members did have local meetings, yeah? And we had 30 people turn up to our Black Country Plan meetings. We had probably over 500 people attending meetings out in the wards. And the response, as Carl has already been through, was very, very successful. So that would be my response. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, Chair. Just 2 points on what Councillor Foster's raised. First one is on having reams and reams of paper for members to go through. We made a conscious decision some years ago, cross-party, to try and become a paperless authority. I don't carry it around with me, but most members have iPads, as we can see here. They have the council minutes on their phones, etc. There is no need to produce endless bundles of paper. If you want to do the right thing in today's green awareness age and not have reams of paper, then I think that is a backward step. Secondly, on the point of proper scrutiny, again, the Labour Party changed the scrutiny process some years ago when David Sparks was leader. It's a process that was agreed cross-party. For instance, on full council meetings, to have the 1 hour scrutiny session where any member can ask the leader, cabinet members and committee chair, scrutiny chairman, any question they so wish. It doesn't have to be from one of these books or any of these agenda or minutes. It can be on any issue relating to this council and its business. On Monday, we had a full council meeting. It ended 40 minutes earlier because Labour members didn't want to ask a question. If you want proper scrutiny, then you need to train your backbenchers and your front bench to put myself and my cabinet and the scrutiny chairs under that relevant scrutiny, because that is what is needed, not this shambolic wittering on about absolute nonsense. Proper scrutiny comes from elected members putting the leaders, cabinet members, scrutiny chairs under that pressure, under that spotlight in this chamber or other places. And you have that opportunity already at hand and you wasted 40 minutes of it on Monday. And to me, I believe in democracy, but I think that is shocking. It's an easy night for me if I go home 40 minutes early, but it shouldn't feel like that. I should come into this chamber and be absolutely worried sick what the opposition are going to throw at me, as should you if you were in control. And at the moment, it's not like that because there isn't the faintest bit of scrutiny coming from those opposition benches. Thank you, Chair.
that, because the scrutiny committee process is set up whereby you have the opportunity to question politicians but also expert witnesses. It provides a different facility, and that's what I'm talking about. There are a whole range of partner organisations, politicians, members of the public, expert witnesses to bring into this process. In the council chamber, you're just going to get a response from a politician. The scrutiny process is meant to be much more thorough and more scientific than what is being suggested here.
Scrutiny is scrutiny, and I think we have a very robust scrutiny process within this council. And you go back to expert witnesses again. We provided expert witnesses, appropriate expert witnesses, and you didn't ask any questions. And we can't keep having meetings where we get MPs in, people from all around the world. We can't get people in. We can't have the time. You know, we need to focus on scrutinising the subject matter on the agenda, and you missed an opportunity to question expert witnesses.
If I may, Chair, that is actually not true. Many of the witnesses that were brought in were actually council officers providing a council position on particular issues. We asked for independent subject matter expert witnesses. Those are the people that we asked, and we think that they would have added some significant value to proceedings.
Lawrence.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to add to the point that we're the only authority that's done any scrutiny on this. The other three authorities involved haven't had any scrutiny meetings. We've had a chock-a-block agenda for the normal future council's agenda, and we've made time and we've made effort to do this, and we've given the public chance to come. When I chaired that meeting in the town hall, you know, normally we give half an hour for a public forum. I think it went on for an hour and a half, and then obviously members were chipping in and asking questions. So, you know, I think we've done a hell of a lot more than anybody else has done, and the responses show that.
Actually give credit to colleagues in the chamber tonight that they agreed the Labour group's proposal for a scrutiny exercise. It's a good example of a cross-party agreement to hold such an exercise.
Councillor Cowell, you've been waiting quite a while now.
Thank you, Chair. I did have two questions actually, but I think the first one really was answered because it was around Michael Gove and the figures. So we've got an update on that, and I'm grateful for that. But the other one actually relates specifically to tonight's paperwork on page 13 around infrastructure and delivery constraints. And there's a very interesting suggestion from the Wildlife Trust, and they're objecting to the term brownfield first because some sites can have a high biodiversity value. And then it goes on to say that national policy is clear in its definition of previously developed land, that this excludes sites where the remains of a permanent structure or fixed surface structure are blended into the landscape. And I just wondered really, A, whether that definition was correct, and B, whether any thought had gone into that more general, that sort of broader definition rather than brownfield, because it does seem to be more specifically where I think most members of the public would want to be in terms of protecting and recognising those sites where effectively you've got a biodiverse invasion, if you like, of the previously developed land.
Yeah, very quickly, Chair. Just because a brownfield site hasn't been utilised for many years and it now has grass growing over it doesn't make it a green space. Let's get that straight. If we don't utilise as many of these brownfield sites as possible, then we will lose in time our green belt. And I find it absolutely appalling that we've had a campaign to not include Ketley Quarry in the call for sites. That is the largest brownfield site in the borough, period, and one of the largest in the Black Country. And if we don't utilise that site, and it's in my ward, and I'll have to deal with the transportation problems because it's a large site, but if we don't utilise that to its full potential, that when we send that draft report back off to that inspector at Bristol, he or she will laugh their socks off at us. He'll be throwing out the largest brownfield site and also try to throw out vast majority of Greenbelt. And we will lose Greenbelt that we didn't expect to lose. It is foolhardy and it's juvenile to expect that we can save Greenbelt, green spaces and indeed brownfield. It's absolutely ludicrous.
Councillor. Councillor Stanley.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start, if I could, on page 3, where referred to largest petitions and objections, and then move over to page 4. And on the top of page 4, it refers to Viewfield Crescent, Dudley. I think this Viewfield Crescent is actually in Sedgley. So, you know, if everything else is addressed as to where the location is, there's absolutely no need to put it down as Dudley. I'd just like to say a few more words about that. It's rather peculiar because the site itself is in the Upper Gornal and Wood Setton ward, but it refers to it as Sedgley, but it should be Upper Gornal and Wood Setton. But it's certainly in Dudley, but I think we ought to be more precise when we have large objections as what we're actually talking about at these meetings. If I could come now to page 5. Well, first of all, I'd like to agree with the Leader of the Council, Councillor Harley, on the transportation side of things. I've attended a development control meeting over a period of time where you get traffic figures put down as a percentage, but you don't know percentage of what. So if you've got 10,000 vehicles on there and you put 1% increase against 100 using it, you don't know. I think we should be fair and transparent of actually a count of what transportation is passing along that highway when you put the figures in and not a percentage, so that people are lost and scratching their head wondering how many people and how many vehicles are involved. So I agree with what Councillor Harley is saying there. The other thing is the brownfield site that Councillor Harley's touched upon. Do we know and identified all the brownfield sites we have in the borough, or are we just guessing at them? And the other part of it is we got a lot of derelict property and houses which could be reused. Do we know where they are and how many there are? Has anybody been down Stourbridge Road and seen what's down there? I mean, these are things which will take the pressure off Greenbelt if we look first of where there's an opportunity of commitment to get those houses built. And that places are already developed, won't take a lot of problems to put right, but they will increase our figures, and we should seriously look at that. The final part is the 10,000 letters. Are these genetic, so they're all going out the same, saying thank you very much for writing in, or what these people have asked for, are they going to get a positive answer back to? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Stanley. I'll try and go through them in order. Yeah, we absolutely have got a comprehensive understanding of our brownfield sites across Dudley and the Black Country. We've been through this exercise, you know, throughout the last number of years. We've turned over every stone effectively, and I think that will be supported by further evidence that comes forward in the near future. In terms of derelict sites, yes, we work all the time. We've got a brownfield land register, and we work all the time with trying to get derelict sites moving forward through the planning process. We've got a stalled sites group that's currently working on sites which actually aren't moving forward quickly enough and looking at different interventions to make sure they are. That will help. We do have a figure within the overall supply which accounts for what we call windfill sites that brings some of those forward anyway, so we don't have to count every one. We have a percentage which says we know they'll come forward through efforts or through chance. And the third point, sorry, was... Oh, the letters, sorry. The letters will be generic in nature because they have to be, because what we'll be doing is responding to each of those comments formally when we publish the publication plan. So obviously we can't do that at this stage because we are dependent on a decision by Cabinet as to what we'll be doing with these sites. So we're not in a position right now to answer everyone's concerns because we'd be effectively making decisions on the plan, which we won't be doing as officers, it'll be members. What we will do is when we publish the publication plan and it goes to consultation, responses to all the issues that have been raised will be available and published on the web. And Vicky might come up with some more on that.
Yeah, when we go out to consultation next time, what you would normally do is you publish the reps, when we publish them, they'll be online so people can see them. usually local authorities tend to do that when they go back up to consultation, but we're doing ours early. We'll also produce a report, a consultation summary report, which is going to probably run into the thousands of pages, but it'll be all the representations that were made, the comments that were made against various aspects of the plan, all put into a table, summarised, and then we do an officer response at the side of it to demonstrate how it's influenced, how we've taken it on board, and if we've updated any evidence, etc. That's what we'll do.
Can I just have a... Yeah. The situation I find myself in here is looking at all of page... what's listed on 17, item 17. There's a lot of important things there. Things like hospitals, doctor surgeries, schools and things like that. Are we in a position that when we come to the final putting the plan together, that population will have those facilities they desperately need? And secondly, the brownfield sites, what concerns me, as an healthy borough, you need to generate jobs. You need to go into employment. And this is employment land, right? And et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm saying to you is this: we don't want to starve ourselves of investment of people actually moving into borough to create jobs. That was my main concern. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Would you like me to? Yeah, we just picking up on the hospitals and facilities. When we produce a publication plan next time round, we produce an infrastructure delivery plan, which is a document which will demonstrate what infrastructure we need to support the plan going forward. We've had comments back already at the last October scrutiny. We had someone from CCGs who talked about number of health, GP surgeries, etc. We've already gotten feedback across the whole of the Black Country and adjacent with Staffordshire, for example, for Walsall, Wolverhampton, of additional schools or additional school places. That will be more formalised when we have to produce that plan because we have to demonstrate the infrastructure can be there to deliver the plan, so that we will be doing that. The next question about brownfield land sites and employment sites, you're absolutely right. Dudley's got a shortage of employment land as well as housing, as well as the Black Country having a shortage of employment land, housing land. We did in the last strategy, the core strategy, we identified a lot of occupied employment land to go for housing because we thought there'd be such a, at the time there'd be a large structural change. That hasn't occurred. People are, companies are staying put, companies are expanding, companies want to stay in the borough, and we have to balance that as well. So we've actually had to take some sites out and say, actually, no, we've been in touch with landowners, they're planning to stay, they're planning to expand, they've got no plans to move off in the foreseeable future. So we've been that's what we've been trying to do in looking at the brownfield sites, what's available and what's, whilst also recognising the importance of the employment land and the economy.
Mr. Chairman, thank the officer for such a comprehensive reply. It's put my mind at rest about certain issues which I was considering not being addressed, but apparently they are. So I thank the officer for that kind response.
Done. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you. Now, Councillor Islam, you raised your hand earlier. You had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, it's been mentioned that we have lessons to learn from the scrutiny. Now, I think we are actually getting a bit sterile. It's been acknowledged tonight that there were lessons to be learned, and the lessons are still to be learned. So we can't just decry that there is nothing to be learned. Okay? So that's one point. And I hope in a dispassionate way we will sit together as we normally do, because you have the chairs, scrutiny chairs meetings, and we can look back at these things and see what we did indeed miss in the early stages of this process. And officers have acknowledged, members have acknowledged that we did learn and improve the scrutiny process. And the facts speaks for themselves, and those are the numbers. So I don't think we should criticize just one colleague, because that colleague was forcefully asking that the scrutiny needs to be better. Scrutiny, if it's better, it serves every one of us, the officers, the councillors, and indeed the population. Because there, when you have expert witnesses, any one of us can pick their brains up in relation to the matter in discussion. So I think the role of experts in this case wasn't really as good as it could have been. And so that's one issue. The other issue is, and this actually shows the point that I'm trying to make, is that when the issue of the population numbers came up, and we discovered that because of Brexit and certain other reasons, that the projected figures were too high, right? And therefore, the number of houses that need to be built were too high in the report. That is when we start talking about, well, what are the true figures? And we discovered that we did not have in-house resource. That's not surprising, because obviously this is a very major task. So we didn't have an in-house resource. So we looked around, and we looked around towards the West Midland Combined Authority, and we were told that they are doing a study, and they will produce a report, and we can use the information from that report. And so one would like to know, well, in light of what we heard tonight, is that relevant? Are we still waiting for that report? If we are still waiting, and if you recall, I did ask that at the November meeting, if we are still waiting, how long can we wait? And if those figures make impact on the figures that we have quoted, then, you know, what is the benefit? How valid are the figures that are actually reported in the consultation documents? So that's that. The other thing, and that's my final point, Chair, if we look at page 2, and in relation to, and also read page 2 in combination with page 5, the proportion of objections as opposed to the number of supports is totally off the scale. I mean, you look at it, the objections are 6,000 and roughly, and the supporting comments are 600, yeah? So I hope that when we are writing to final document, the final document will bear that out, that, you know, majority of the people, overwhelming majority of the people, were objecting to what was proposed. And I think that is what the leader is looking for, and I hope this report has given him. So that's the final point, Chair. There's a lot to be learned, and we mustn't stop learning. Thank you.
2 points. There are always lessons to be learned in life, and those lessons will be continued to be learned going forward. And it's an iterative process, so don't worry about that. On the data analysis of increasing populations and the work that you referred about, the West Midlands Combined Authority undertaking work for the Black Country / Dudley Borough. At the next scrutiny meeting on the 16th, one of the presenters is Gareth Bradford, and he's the Director of Housing and Regeneration, Councillor Islam. Hello? You're listening? So you will have ample opportunity to ask him, and he's prepared to respond on that point as to what they've been doing and where they are. He's Director of Regeneration Housing, so that's probably one of the most senior people outside of Whitehall, who you'll have before you on the 16th to ask questions. And the third, I know Councillor Harley wants to come in now.
Yeah, it's on the report commissioned by the Combined Authority. The 4 Black Country leaders didn't ask them to do it, but they'll tell you they did it on our behalf, but we didn't ask them. I think you'll be slightly disappointed. I don't think there's a plethora of new sites being proposed by that report. I think what they've done is revisit our brownfield sites that we rejected across the Black Country, and I don't think their analysis has probably gone deep enough as to what our relevant 4 teams did as to why they refused those brownfield sites for whatever reason, be it, you know, uneven, bad contamination that we can't resolve, but for whatever reason, that there won't be a great increase in numbers. Where I think we may have an increase in numbers is, as Carl suggested, is that town centre redevelopment where we use more office space, more retail, and turn it into residential. I think we may have an uplift in numbers there. There's some exciting projects in Dudley, you know, the old Dudley Leisure Centre site, Trident Centre. We could have more homes there than we perhaps expected at the start of this process.
No, I just echo what Councillor Harley said, really. I think selfishly, I'm quite pleased that that report shows that officers across the 4 authorities did a comprehensive job. Obviously, I'd like them to have found 20,000 houses, but they haven't. But instead of that, you know, to endorse the approach we've taken, I think at least gives us some comfort and hopefully gives members and the members of the public some comfort that we've done the best we can.
Carl. Councillor Kettle.
Thank you. I'd just like to go back to the issue of interesting parties and having difficulty getting them here. Surely we can offer them a window on a Teams meeting and have their views via Teams. Let's use the technology. It's there for us. Why not offer, you know, if we had an hour in if there was an acrimonious subject and we allowed, say, an hour in the odd meeting and gave 12 slots out or 10 slots out on Teams, so people in their own home could advocate a position or a logic that we needed to listen to as part of the consultation. Surely it's time we can offer people this time slot on Teams and bring them in quite conveniently at very little cost, and I think it would move on greatly. That's the one point. Another one, if I may, to you, Carl. The concept of brown, white zone and green, does that still apply?
Well, there's a reference in the white paper and the planning reform about having just 3 zones. That hasn't come forward. Excuse me, hasn't come forward yet, as Vicky mentioned. We still obviously refer to brownfield, we refer to greenfield, we refer to green belt. The proposals in the white paper talked about making them a lot firmer, I think, in terms of area for growth, area for protection. That hasn't come forward as yet. Obviously, much as like Vicky said before, if something does change at any point during this process, we have to adapt with it, but it hasn't been formalised.
What I'm trying to make is that if we have partially developed land that is no longer agricultural, as per we have in say, Treherne's farm, which is quite a big acreage, and that's hardly being used as playing fields in real terms, let's be honest, but it's been taken out of the agricultural sphere of influence, and how long before they can claim that it's no longer green belt?
It's a difficult one for me to answer, really. I think it's a legal question we'd have to look at the time, but there's a number of different factors, even if it wasn't. So, for example, I don't want to get too technical in this, but you can have previously developed land that is still green belt. And then you have to factor in, we've had an example down at Norton Road, I think, where they would argue it's previously developed land, but it can still be in the green belt. And so green belt factors still apply. I'm not sure specifically on what arguments they'd make, but we'd have to run them through a legal process and use case law to support our position.
Councillor Lawrence, you had a question.
Yeah, mine was just regarding the next phase and the consultation. Just on Ian's point, I think we did run some Teams events, didn't we, where members of the public logged on and they could ask questions online. I seem to remember something like that happening. Anyway, just in regards to the next consultation, obviously the website, we had issues with that the first time round. Have we moved any further forward in putting a bit of pressure on the supplier? Because I assume we're going to have to use that system again. And you know, could we look at simplifying it? You gave us the forms to fill out. Can't we just put that as a simple form online that people can fill in? And then on the budget side of it, is there a budget for marketing for the next stage of the consultation? I know it's quite large, wasn't it, for this one? And obviously I've tried to squeeze out tonight sort of what my workload is going to be and my ward colleagues, and Warleaf is one over there. But I assume positive responses, if certain things happen, are good as well, and we need to be engaging with people to try and, you know, it's not all about negative. We need people to, if they agree with what we put out there, to, you know, put those thoughts forward as well.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Yeah, I think, first of all, on the website, that was procured by all 4 authorities throughout the start of the process, and we are tied to it till the end of the process. we will continue to work with those to simplify the way how much it can be adapted to be used. And that's why I think that officers on hand who can use the system for people will be one of the ways to combat that issue, because I'm not sure how much they can change it to make it easier. I know there are model forms as well that we're aware of, and I think as with last time we put those forms on the web, we can do so again. It helps us immensely if they're filled in electronically, in terms of the speed of us turning those around and coming back to the public on those, which is why it's been so slow this time, because we have to effectively type it back into the system. It's huge admin hours. But we'll have those forms available. We'll make them, hopefully we'll make them that they can be typed straight into and returned via email. The third point, there is a budget, communications budget across the 4 authorities. I'm not sure whether I know exactly what it is right now, but obviously that is a key consideration when we talk with our communications colleagues as to how we best spend that budget. One key thing that I think we need to bear in mind is that decisions on how we consult need to be made across the 4 authorities in the same way. We can deviate slightly in Dudley as to how we approach our individual local communities, but we must undertake a consultation exercise that's consistent across the Black Country. Otherwise, that would again be a test that might make the plan fail its level of soundness. The only thing I would say, without prolonging the conversation, is that, as Vicky alluded to before, we do, and we have across the Black Country, released our evidence a lot earlier than other authorities tend to do. I was in a meeting with the CPRE a couple of years ago, and they were really impressed with the fact that we'd put our consultation comments online early, which we did to the issues and options stage, and we're doing again in the next couple of weeks. We don't have to do that. That's what we're doing, even though we're not in a position to respond to them yet, to give people confidence that we've taken it on board and give people a much more detailed view than the report that I presented tonight. So we are trying everywhere to kind of be a model, I suppose, and this is the most complex and controversial plan that Dudley's ever had to face. So I think that it's obvious that we'll learn as we go, but I think we're getting there, and I think that there are areas that we are quite good at in terms of being open and transparent early on. So, thank you.
Responses are encouraged as well.
I think we need positive responses to things we've done. I think one thing that's noticeable is obviously the vast majority of comments are objections. That's not unusual. And they're at the sites which we allocated. Where it's been quite quiet across the borough, maybe is areas where we haven't allocated sites, but we have to be conscious of the fact that officers will be expected to defend every decision and examination. So we will have opposition who want us to allocate sites in Hell's Owen and in Stourbridge and areas where we maybe haven't proposed sites to be allocated. They're not off the table for us. We have to defend them. So going to Councillor Hardy's point, when we go through this exercise, we're always conscious as officers of we have to have this evidence there. And even if we're all on the same page as Dudley, we have to be able to defend people who will say, well, actually, you haven't got the infrastructure or you haven't tested this. So I think it's imperative, and what I would hope, and we'll hope again for the next exercise, that people respond positively to things that we haven't allocated. We've got a bit of that in here, but maybe we need a bit more. That might help.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, got a few points to make. First of all, in terms of what Councillor Kettle said about bringing in witnesses and having them broadcasting remotely, I think that's what we envisaged actually for the scrutiny exercise, that there would be an opportunity to do that, because if you remember, we were still in some form of regulation because of the pandemic, and we recognised that some people would not necessarily want to travel anyway to meetings, but they're not the decision makers, they're giving advice and a view, so they don't need to be in the room like we do as politicians. So certainly I think that should be a serious consideration for the future. The second point I want to make relates to what Councillor Cowell pointed out in the report, and also what Councillor Stanley said, because not all brown sites, not all greenfield sites are equal, I recognise that, and neither are all brownfield sites are equal. And when brownfield sites evolve to be greenfield sites, or green sites, and with all the biodiversity that comes with that, no matter what professionals or officers designate them as, or what they should be officially, people still value them. However, that really reinforces the point that Councillor Stanley made about making sure that we can find genuine brownfield sites, so we can avoid building on whatever sites are valuable to people, whether they're brownfield sites that have gone green or genuinely greenfield sites. If we can find alternative brownfield sites to build on, then that is going to preserve that space as well. That is still of value to the public. I'm welcome as well the working party that's looking at the derelict and stalled sites, because and part of the background to that working party being set up was that when the chief executive first came to the borough, when we were his first appointed, and he came from Wolverhampton where they use CPO powers far more regularly than Dudley does, I showed him around 6 stalled and derelict sites in my ward, and he then came up with the idea that there should be, clearly with so many sites across the borough, similar to my ward, having these sort of sites, there needed to be something to bring people together, to raise money, and to try and get these sites sorted out. I've calculated that if all the sites in my ward that I've identified can be tackled and turned into housing, we wouldn't need to build on the 2 green spaces in my ward, because there would probably be enough housing units to cancel that proposal out, which would be really welcome as well. I think also it's worth highlighting that it's National Empty Homes Week this week, and we have something like, I think, 3,000 people looking for a council house, over 2,000 empty properties as well in the borough, and I think it does really focus your mind about where the opportunities are, if they can be tackled, that we can avoid building on green belt and green spaces, if some of these can be brought into practical use as homes. So I think it's really worth mentioning that, given that it is National Empty Homes Week this week. And finally, I think one of the lessons as well is, and what hasn't been talked about much this evening, is there's a real issue about affordable homes. And throughout the process, I've been concerned, certainly my group has been very concerned about the lack of reference to affordable homes and the low numbers of affordable homes that there's an aspiration to build compared to other homes. And even the definition of affordable is arguable to some people, depending on the level of their income. And of course, as well now, the rising cost of living. So I do think there's some additional work to be done on that. Can we find alternative sites to green sites? Can we look at brownfield sites? And can we look at having more affordable homes? Because clearly what's been proposed as affordable possibly doesn't meet demand.
Yeah, I tend to agree with what you've just suggested, but that's the whole point of the last 12 months of the Black Country Plan. Putting sites forward, throwing some sites out, having a vast consultation process to what we keep in or don't. We've done that. Even the West Midlands Combined Authority has had an exercise trying to find more brownfield sites, and they can't. And yet you've led a campaign to not develop Ketley Quarry, which is the largest brownfield site in the borough. And don't say you haven't. I've seen the poster on the side passenger, on the rear passenger door in your car. You can't have it both ways, Judy. You can't campaign to save brownfield sites and then campaign to save Greenbelt. It's brownfield or Greenbelt.
Truthful, I've had nothing to do with the Ketley Quarry. It's not in my ward. I have no interest in the Ketley Quarry site.
Side of your car.
Pensnet Save Our Spaces. It relates to the 2 sites in my ward and those 2 alone.
No, it doesn't.
I've had no involvement with the Ketley Quarry site.
Yes, you have.
Not at all.
You've even posted it on Facebook in the past, and we can save the screenshot for you.
No, I've had no involvement with the Ketley Quarry site at all.
But you had it plastered on your rear window.
Yeah, Pensnet Save Our Spaces.
No, and Ketley Quarry. You
Not
even gave the
interested.
reference number out of this guy's document.
I've only responded to consultation on the Pensnet sites. I've had no direct involvement with the Ketley Quarry sites at all.
You're being disingenuous, Judy. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. I think he's a Labour Party candidate, former Labour Party candidate.
If I can just... Just a couple of technical points on there. I think obviously we'd all endorse the need to use our empty homes and make sure they're brought back into use. Those homes are already provided in the plan though, and whether they're occupied or not, they would still not take off the number that we need. The other thing I think is really important, it's very complex, but it's something I've repeated before, but I still think does confuse at times. We're about 28,000 short on our need. If we were to convert and find any more brownfield sites somehow, they don't necessarily knock out greenbelt or greenfield sites, because until you have the 28,000 that we're missing, that's the first opportunity you have to take out green as an alternative. So if someone finds 15 houses and says, well, that can replace 7 Drive or wherever, that it doesn't work that way. We have to find the 28,000 across the backcountry before we can start to knock any out, because we're so short. So I'm totally agreeing with the principle and would love to endorse it, but I just think that's an important point to make. With any extra brownfield sites we find, we need to put them in our supply. Thank you.
Just to clarify, Chair, it's not nice when members throw aspirations over that each one of us is telling fibs. Selected sites to oppose, and this was paperwork attached to Councillor Foster's rear window. SA 0050, which is Bryce Road Green Space, that's fair dues. 0199, which is 7 Drive Green Space, fair dues. 0025, Summerhill Triangle Green Space, absolutely fair dues. 0017, which is Hull Beach Greenbelt, fair dues. 0042, Lapwood Avenue Green Space, fair dues, that's in my ward, and I'm uneasy about that development. Even though if it means saving the Triangle and Hull Beach, I'll be prepared to stand up and say we need those numbers, but I have concerns. Then you have 0198 Standhills Road Green Space, which is the bit between Standhills Road and Ketley Quarry, for those members that don't know. Fair dues, because that is quite a good natural habitat for wildlife. Then we have DUH 218 Guys Lane. Fair enough. Then we had Black Country Reference 203 Ketley Quarry. I'm sorry, but you are absolutely wrong. And the gentleman who you do know was the Labour Party candidate in King Springfield South for many, many years. So you do know him. He was a former, I think, Dudley South chair or secretary. So I'd like you to withdraw your remarks. You've been caught bang to rights, Judy. Don't take us for fools.
Our group's position is no development on green spaces and green belt. And I've been quite clear about my position, both in the press and in my response to the consultation. The fact that some of these posters may be generic and cover a number of sites is one thing, but my concern, and my concern only, has been for those sites in my ward and those other sites that I've responded on individually, and we adopt the position, no development on green sites or green spaces. And you have supporters of your own who have been actively involved in the Ketley Quarry issue, nothing to do with the people that I represent in my own ward or me.
Our position about Greenbelt is exactly the same. Councillor Ali, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Firstly, because I haven't spoken, I think I also want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who's submitted comments and participated in the consultation process, and they deserve acknowledgement for that. I'm not going to go into the political broadcast on which this scrutiny committee has been made into today, but had it not been pressure from this side and some members on the other side, this committee would have kind of ended in one meeting or in a behind closed doors working group. Now, it's really good that, we've had all the meetings in public, the minuted and all of that. I think what I want to say is the work of this committee in relation to the Green Belt shouldn't finish here. We've still got some opportunity to further strengthen the case against development on Green Belt and green spaces, and we should take that opportunity. And if that means involving independent people to give advice and expertise, then that should be done. And then we should, from this committee, formulate a set of recommendations which should be submitted formally in line to the officers to have from this committee to strengthen our case. And also it's really important that because we've had large number of comments from one particular area that we forget all the others. I think all green belt and green spaces are important to everyone wherever they might be. So I think we need to, take those into consideration as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Are there any more questions from members? Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Listen to the remarks that have just been made. Quite recently, I spoke to the leader of the council over a property very close to where I live that belongs to the local authority, which has been boarded up since April last year. And residents say to me how much rent the council's lost on that particular property. But that's not the only one. What I'd like to have done is to see exactly how many council properties that we've got in our stock that are not being used, because it may be quite a lot there which will help out with our figures eventually. Not only that will help with the figures, but it will also take a lot of eyesore away from metal grits put up windows month after month after month, and there's people out there looking for an home. So I do think, really speaking, we should seriously look at ourselves as far as housing is concerned and find out exactly how many empty properties we've got and how many we can put back into use. Thank you.
Chair. Is it okay? Just to come back on that point, again, I totally agree with the use of all empty properties, housing or private. What I do need to stress, though, is if they're occupied or not occupied, they're still included in the numbers that we have. It's obviously imperative that we get them occupied, but it wouldn't change the overall number. But I totally agree with the principle and the thank you.
Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And we just mentioned recommendations, and I think as a committee we should be siding with our residents and looking at the responses to the consultation. And I think we should be recommending to Cabinet that all the green belt sites are removed from the draft plan going forward. So I propose this as a recommendation, Chair.
And I'll second that. Councillor Foster. Sorry, yep.
And that all green spaces are taken out as well. So all greenfield sites effectively. The greenfield
I think that's
sites,
what was being proposed.
yes,
Any green space, greenfield sites in the Black Country Plan should be taken out. That's what we were proposing.
Yeah, so I'll propose that, Chair.
Yeah, I'll second it. Any more questions from members? No? Okay. Councillor Islam, okay.
My hand when this ping pong was going on about certain allegations, I don't think that is part of scrutiny. I think scrutiny is about the subject matter at hand. It was very unfortunate to witness that, and I hope we don't witness that again. I think we should learn that this is important, that we be positive and be productive and be helpful, but not name names. Thank you.
About the subject matter.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make a point, really, nothing to do with the agenda. Can I put in a request? I mean, I'm new to this, and obviously I know a lot of members are quite experienced in that. But I feel it's important that we stick to the agenda. If there's any issues with the scrutiny and so on, I believe that's got nothing to do with the actual agenda, and that should be decided outside the meeting. I feel it's unprofessional, and I don't think it's right, and I think certainly it's unfair for our members here from the public who have come, you know, obviously some in a lot of pain as well, so I don't feel it's right. So if there are any issues with the whole process, I think it should be taken outside the meeting. We all have emails, we all have phone calls, and I'm sure the chair is approachable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Salim. And we do have a scrutiny agenda setting process where the Chair and the Vice Chair and Democratic Services agree the agendas. We've had to remove a couple of 3 major items this year, which was, you know, put pressure on us from the Black Country Plan because that expanded. And those are important issues. But, you know, we have a big agenda and we need to stick to it. And I really want to move on. Make your point, Councillor Foster.
Chair, I'm grateful. I don't agree with Councillor Salim because we've actually talked about lessons learnt from the consultation process, And the scrutiny process has in effect been part of that, because we've had members of the public come to the scrutiny committees to provide evidence. So I think it is relevant to raise the process within the lessons learned that we have been invited to discuss this evening.
Councillor Foster, thank you. Yeah, I agree in what you said, but I don't agree with trying to change the agenda or the scrutiny process, which you've suggested at several meetings. We're not here to scrutinise the process. We're here to scrutinise the items on the agenda, and we mustn't forget that. But your point's noted. Councillor Islam.
I think what I'm going to say might be construed as that I am trying to talk about another agenda. Unfortunately, I understood that we were trying to learn the lessons of the consultation in relation to what is presented. And what has presented shown how in processing the whole consultation process, this scrutiny committee learned the lessons on the foot. And so it was quite relevant to remind us how we progressed. And in that spirit, that is what we have done tonight. I don't think we have hijacked the agenda. I don't think we have strayed from the agenda. We paid compliment to the officers. We paid compliment to our own colleagues who, in this meeting, for example, for most part have sat quiet, but unlike some other colleagues, were making very constructive suggestions which were taken on. I think you were not present at some of those meetings, Chair, with respect to your sufferings at that time. So I think all is gone in a very positive spirit, and this tonight shows that, because we have actually acknowledged each other's contributions. Sometimes silence is better. Thank you.
I agree. We've done it from within scrutiny. I'm afraid a member of the public is not allowed to make comments outside of the public. Oh. No, you can't, I'm afraid. Sorry. Any more questions, members? Councillor Rogers.
The scrutiny development session on the 21st, I think most of these, or if not all of the points, will be expressed then quite thoroughly. So that will reassure members.
Okay. I'm going to move on to the last agenda item 7, to consider any questions from members to the Chair where 2 clear days' notice has been given to the monitoring officer.
No questions received, Chair.
Okay. On that basis, I'm now going to close the meeting. I can't believe we're finishing a Dudley Future Council meeting so early. I think we'll all be happy about that. And I would like to compliment the officers on the work they've done on the consultation period. Many thanks and good night.